Hey everyone, I hope that you and all your loved ones are doing well. I'm sorry I haven't checked in a little while, but I wanted to take a minute and just let you know where we're at with things in class. I've really been enjoying the work that you've been doing, I should say, on our class timeline on Tiki and I've been enjoying our conversations on Twitter and elsewhere. Um, you've been doing a great job of focusing on the guiding questions for each unit for the most part. Where I'm at with things, I'm going to be reading through the journal entries for Unit 4 a little later today or tomorrow morning at the latest. This week, of course, we're working on Unit 5. This last part of the course has a little bit of overlap in terms of some of the themes and events that we'll be studying, but we'll be coming at the events of the mid to late 20th century from a couple of different angles. So last week, for example, we were looking at revolution. We were looking at self-determination in terms of the first part of the 20th century and the movement towards populist leadership by mid-century in Latin America, in many cases, not all, of course. Um, this week, we're going to look at reaction. So we're thinking about the context of the global Cold War, the United States capitalist democracy that was put into a conflict that never became an open hot war, at least between the United States and the Soviet Union, with the Soviet Union, and its model of authoritarian Marxism. So something to keep in mind as we look at the reactions to the Cold War, the ways that there were proxy wars that played out in Latin America. Proxy wars meaning they had to do with the Cold War, but they were never specifically the United States versus the Soviet Union. Instead, in places like Guatemala, in places like Chile, Brazil, Argentina, the United States became involved with supporting usually right-wing authoritarian regimes that stood to bring stability from the perspective of the United States, that would pretty much do what U.S. policymakers wanted to see happen in those nations, instead of allowing for open democratic systems to function across the region. So what we're looking at in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s in Latin America is a pretty dark time for most places in terms of civil rights, in terms of human rights. There were lots of human rights violations. And so what I want us to think about is not just capitalism versus Marxism. That's often, the way that the Cold War was laid out. This is the world struggle between these two ideologies. But we need to recognize that both of those things can function either within a democratic system or within authoritarian systems. So what we'll see in Latin America is capitalist support for authoritarian regimes in the 1960s and 70s. And so I think that's what we really need to focus on, is what is it that brings about authoritarianism in this region, in various nations, in our own country. These are things that we need to be thinking about, I think, especially right now in our current moment. What are the things that we can do, the systems that we can promote that will allow for the greatest amount of human equality and human rights? What allows for social justice? And so what we get in this section in Unit 5 is a cautionary tale from Latin America when social justice and human rights were not upheld. So what we're going to think about then is what specifically about the Cold War context led to those issues in terms of civil rights and human rights in Latin America. How did that play out and why? That's not exactly word for word the guiding question, but that's the vein that we'll be thinking in. We'll continue on those kinds of topics in Unit 6, but we'll be focusing specifically on Ay Rigoberta Menchú and historical memory. So we're going to look next week at Chapter 12 in the Wood and Alexander book, along with Ay Rigoberta Menchú. Remember that whether you choose to complete the Menchú essay for the final project or the También la Lluvia review essay, for Unit 6, you'll need to respond to some of the Rigoberta Menchú questions on the discussion board. Depending on whether or not you've done all of the timeline assignments up through Unit 5. You could maybe skip Unit 6. If you've missed one along the way, make sure you do the timeline assignment in Unit 6. That is just to say that I remember I dropped the lowest score on the timeline and on, let's see, and the journal and the timeline. I'll have to look at that again. I do slightly different things in different classes, so I was just remembering where we were at. So anyway, I hope that all is going well. Please let me know if you have questions, if you want to talk about anything, if you could use any help, and I hope that you're having a good week.